Hello, Melinda. Are you there? Melinda?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm glad I got a hold of you, calling you from somewhere in a bunker. Um, Things seem to be going okay, but I love this idea. Let's talk about all of the books, shows, and movies that have warned us about what's going on right now.
Mm,
And so this is called BM by BM,
yes.
books and movies by Bailey and Maxie. So I'm Andrew Maxie,
And I'm Melinda Bailey.
and we're delighted to be sharing this little adventure with those of you out there. Vote Frodo and Sam 2020, by the way.
Fill out the
Tonight,
census. Yes.
that too. Tonight we're talking about 1984. This classic book is one that should be basically a handbook for people who are um, basically alive today. So, Melinda, do you want to start with what you got on this book?
Well, a general summary is it's about Winston Smith. Yes, that's his last name. It's very common. I find it very interesting that his name was Winston because it always makes me think of Winston Churchill. And I'm a
Mm-hmm.
huge fan of The Crown. John Lithgow did amazing work. So Winston is just like this little guy going around his business, doing his thing, but then he decides to start a diary. And
Mm-hmm.
you never thought that a diary would be controversial, but he
Right.
starts writing down his thoughts. And then this girl named Julia's like, "Hey, I love you." And he's like almost 40 and she's not, but he's cool with it. So they get together, and then it ends up that it's all a big ruse and he just falls apart at the end. That was a very concise explanation or summary. Would you like to expound upon it?
Well, yes. So they are living in a society in 1984 where um, I wonder if most of the people watching this realize that things and expressions and ideas we take for granted actually came from this book, such
Absolutely.
as Big Brother.
Mm-hmm.
There are giant posters everywhere that say Big Brother is watching you, which mean Big Brother is like at the top of the whole society. And one of the slogans that the society has is who controls the past
Mm-hmm.
controls the future.
Mm-hmm.
Who controls the present controls the past. And the way that that works in this novel is through the ministry of truth. And the ministry of truth is tasked with correcting any record that exists that contradicts what Big Brother wants people to think.
Mm-hmm.
And the government, the organization,
Ingsoc.
basically puts out decrees and says, this is not true. This never was true. Your memory is incorrect. That didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so the whole doublespeak, the idea of doublespeak, comes from 1984. And in 1984, in fact, the emotion of language is so problematic that they start to pare down language. Melinda, as a linguistics teacher, as a teacher of a language, I'm sure you have some thoughts on the danger of chopping out the complexity
Mm-hmm.
of language and making it super simple.
Right. Well, that's one of the things that really stuck out to me in 1984 is how, first of all, it actually kind of reminds me a lot of Tolkien, except instead of creating Elvish, George Orwell created an appendix of multiple uses at the end of the book. And it's just incredible to me how many of the same words we still use today. Like everybody talks about Big Brother. There's think speak, thought criminals. There are all these things that remind me of like just that inherent guilt sometimes people can have. And the government harnessed that and used it to change their language so that it would only make the government seem good. I think they really made people second guess themselves, so then they were not as successful human beings, they, like, in some ways, they had no independence, they had no individuality. Everything was supposed to be what the government wanted in the way that it wanted at the timing of the government, how the government was operating. So like that, I guess the relationship between Winston and Julia really stood out to me in the book, and I think it's one of the main themes of the book. But the whole premise of Julia and Winston being together is kind of them sticking it to the man because they saw their relationship. Because, well, first of all, Winston is still married, but they can't get divorced and they can't have kids. So
Right.
then he hangs out with Julia and they're fine just being together. But it really makes you wonder, like, what would marriage look like in this society if your only purpose is to have children, and if you can't have children and you can't get divorced, what kind of relationship does that leave you with? But
Right.
that's where we are.
For me, sticking just for a moment longer, the idea of stripping out all the complexity of
Right,
language.
language.
So they had, um, for example, there was no such word as bad. You would
Mm,
apply the word un to the beginning of words. So there was good and ungood. And then if something was more than ungood or more than good, you would just say plus. So here's an example from the actual appendix. Any word could be negative, whatever that word is, by words, by adding the affix un, or it could be strengthened by the affix plus, or for still greater emphasis, double plus. Thus, for example, uncold meant warm, while plus cold and double plus cold meant respectively very cold and superlatively cold. So I mean, there's some of these things where if we rob you of your language, then we rob you of your ability to think. And if we rob you of your ability to think, we're going to get compliance out of you, because
right.
that's what's going to happen. And so for them, thinking, just the act of thinking was an act of defiance.
Right. And Winston was being defiant by having a diary. Like, he didn't show the diary to anyone, he just wrote down his thoughts, but that in itself was a crime in this society.
Yeah. So uh, one of the other really key quotes, which is the official slogan of the party. And y'all brace yourselves, because this may or may not ring true here. The official slogans are: war is
Yes.
peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Um, and as I watch the news and as I see what's going on, this whole thing of, aha, that thing you just saw with your own eyes, you did not see with your own eyes,
Yes.
because we said so. And it's a very nasty thing for you to suggest that you saw the thing you say you saw. The party and Big Brother say that you didn't see that thing.
Right.
And then the ministry, then the opposite. So these opposites, and these, if we break down the meaning of words, then the ability of the individual to think and to object is greatly reduced.
Hmm. It makes me think of Melissa McCarthy's Sean Spencer, or yeah, Sean Spicer,
Spicer,
uh,
yeah.
Spicer's skits on Saturday Night Live, when I just remember her saying, like, vehemently, the travel ban is not a ban. Those are your words,
Right,
not mine. And
right.
it just shows you how, even in today's society where we live, people can use language as a weapon, whether it's a derogatory slur or it's the actual truth of restricting people from certain countries would be considered somewhat of a travel ban.
Well, by the way, I grew up in Nigeria,
That's
everybody,
true.
and I love Nigeria's response, which is fine. Then we ban all of you too. And I'm like, good job, Nigeria. Except, excuse me, I'd like to come visit. Can I have an exception? No. Um, so part of our structure and what we agreed to talk about when we do this is sort of maybe some, we're making connections already, but recommendations or connections or anything like that. So what's your best takeaway?
Um, so with all of the surveillance in 1984, there are screens in everyone's rooms, in their homes. There is no privacy. So you could look at a cell phone as such a device, except right now, depending on which privacy policy you've agreed to, their terms and conditions, you post your likes, your dislikes, your comments, your location, some other connections I made. So there is a documentary series on Netflix called Don't F with Cats. And it's about someone who was torturing animals and killing animals and eventually killed a person. But what is interesting is how an online community came together to track him down and told the police it was an issue, but they didn't have sufficient evidence. The police didn't believe them, and then someone ended up dying. However, I did learn from the documentary that every single picture you take, it can have a GPS location on it. So you can be placed in different places when you are submitting pictures online. A lot of times we tag where we are to recommend a restaurant. The robots can figure out what we like and what we don't like. Cookies are generated for different items that we may or may not buy. Whether we're just looking at things online or not. Like, even in school, I teach high school French, and I can walk by a student's computer and there's an ad for something that they were looking at, maybe at home on their home network, and I can see it in school. So that's kind of freaky. And then
Yeah.
the other connection I made, it reminded me a lot of the movie Snowden with Joseph Gordon-Levitt. That was a really interesting peek into the NSA and how the government can surveil you under times of war. Maybe if you feel like it's not at war, your privacy is still invaded. There's a lot of information that the government can have on you. We just don't think about it. And as for me, I am concerned about my privacy information, like my social security number, my address, my telephone, that information being private. However, I've also come to realize that whatever we post on the internet, like even this video on my YouTube channel, like anyone can find it. So also
Right.
have common sense to be aware of what you're putting out there.
Right.
Those are my
Um,
connections.
yeah, absolutely. And that I have a spark on that. And one of in a course I took recently, a lot of what you just talked about, I learned a lot more about that. And you mentioned so metadata about the pictures you take is embedded in the photograph unless you turn that feature off.
Right.
And there was a story a couple years ago about um, a service member who posted a picture of, I think, 4 new helicopters that were delivered to their base. To like, yeah, we just finally the tools we need or something like that. And the next day, those helicopters were blown up by saboteurs who used the metadata
Mm-hmm.
from the picture to figure out exactly the exact GPS location of those machines. And a movie that we have on our list for later, Minority Report,
Yes.
shows targeted advertising like you're talking about. And when that came out, that seemed a little far fetched. But even the exact technology of displaying ads, digital ads, outside machines, so on billboards. So imagine, and you've just talked about how the ads follow you across machines because all
Mm-hmm.
the machines know it's still you, no matter which machine you're on. So, with human surveillance, and of course, I'm obsessed with Teslas. I want a Tesla. As soon as I get one, my car will be tattling on me too. You know that the billboards when you go by, watch for it. They will change based on who's looking at them, and so even the billboards and the things around me are going to be customized to me.
Mm-hmm.
um, and part of what we need to think about is all the convenience we have comes with some of these freedoms that we're giving up, and you can't unring some of those bells. Um,
Right.
for me, in the case of, so the 1984 is for me a political book.
Hmm.
It's talking about the party, about Big Brother, and about the danger of a government that seeks to know everything about you and control you.
Hmm.
The one thing, the little piece of hope that I would have is, um, I would think most people who live in this country would agree that right now, um, there's a whole lot of tension and disagreement around most political issues. Um, but I think the hope that I have is, um, a diversity of perspective and opinions is still here.
Hmm.
No one perspective. Now, folks will argue that some dominate and seek to silence, but there's not an actual silencing of dissent, no matter how you would define dissent or which political view you subscribe to. And
Right.
so, for me, the perhaps for us, the ability of our phones to say, no, I do have the evidence, I have preserved the evidence, and I refuse to be bullied into withholding the evidence that I have. So, the Winstons of today's are saying, I'm keeping a diary and I'm putting it out there for everyone else so that if
Hmm.
something happens to me, the record still exists. So that is almost a ray of hope for me there.
Hmm. I'm trying to remember the names of the different ministries that they have.
So there was a Ministry of Peace that
Uh-huh.
waged war, the Ministry of Love that conducted torture, political torture,
Hmm.
and the Ministry of Truth
Hmm.
that um, was uh, charged with ensuring that, basically, with lying, with modifying and falsifying
Hmm.
every available piece of paper and documentation that would contradict what the party was currently claiming. And in fact, there's a part of the book where the party began literally overnight to say the opposite of what it was just saying, and they
Right.
had to quickly find, destroy, and replace all the evidence
Right.
that there ever was a change, and they denied they ever changed. So, um, that whole idea, this term wasn't used in 1984, but the idea of gaslighting, like,
Yes.
no, you don't remember what you think you remember. Where's your proof?
Hmm.
Um,
That
so
also
that
kind of reminded me of Wikipedia. Like, I know that we
ooh,
can edit things, but hopefully we're not. Um, and one of the other sparks of hope that we have is that they didn't have the Supreme Court. So thankfully, we have a system in place of checks and balances with our
yeah,
government so that hopefully we have people whose job is to read the law. God bless RBG, to read the law and to rule on the law and make sure that people's freedoms are upheld. So I'm thankful that we have that.
all right. So at this point in the show, we get to tell our folks what happens to us as long as my bunker's not breached and
Yes.
that high tower you're in doesn't
Yes.
come crashing. Melinda, tell our viewers, is this a millionaire's apartment that you've stumbled upon when the streets are
It is
okay?
actually. I have an antique
Okay.
shop downstairs with some,
Wow.
artifacts from previous rebellion that I've
What
kept
about
over the
food?
years. Yeah, I
You
have
good on
some
food?
food. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. I'll Venmo you later. Uh, who knows if we still have Venmo in this
True.
hypothetical time?
It's
What are we
all
going to talk
Bitcoin.
about on Friday?
Friday we're going to talk about The Matrix.
Yes.
Yes.
One of my all-time favorites movies. Wow, chock full of metaphor too, by the way. But that's
So
probably not what
many.
we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
But I love it. And so Friday, we're looking to move to a live show. So for those of you who are watching this recording, 8:15, we will share links between now and then.
Yes.
And oh, by the way, here's something not even Melinda knows. Um, I have an artifact with me, a first edition
Oh my
copy
gosh.
of 1984. It's in plastic, otherwise my greasy hands might touch it.
That's
So it's not
amazing.
a reading copy. This is so if ever I become concerned, then I'll breach the plastic and compare this text to this text to make sure the ministry of truth has not compromised my recollection of this book.
That is so funny.
Melinda, this is awesome. I can't wait till Friday. If anyone else out there is watching it, we'd love to have your feedback. Um, we plan to have a YouTube channel, so later you can like and subscribe. But for now, like in the form of feedback. And we are open to recommendations as long as you understand that our schedule is pretty full with plans until about, what is it, like November. So there's plenty of dystopia to work our way through.
Absolutely. The world has ended so many times. Let's just talk about it.
All right.
Okay.
Great show.
Yeah.
Thanks for being with me on this journey.
You're welcome.
All right. Catch you Friday.
Alrighty.